It's time for the second mock draft of the year. This time we're going 3 rounds with trades, and as always, it's going to be a what I would do mock draft, not necessarily trying to predict what's going to happen this early on. So the Bears are picking first overall, and we're going to start out with a trade, not for the first overall pick. The Falcons are going to send 43 for Justin Fields, get their quarterback of the future. This conversation's been had so many times at this point, but to me, it just makes a lot more sense to reset the quarterback contract window. And at first overall, I'm going to go with Drake May out of UNC. I'm working on getting all of these scouting reports written up, so for the ones that I do have finished, I'll put them up on the screen, and if I don't hang on them long enough, you can pause and screenshot. But Drake May is my quarterback one at this point. I wouldn't hate going with Caleb Williams over him. I think they're both really good prospects, and I am going to have the Commanders go with Caleb Williams out of USC. To me, Drake May and Caleb Williams are great prospects that each have one or two major weaknesses. With Drake May, it's accuracy. With Caleb Williams, it's fumbles, and then he's good when he operates within structure, but he does kind of have a tendency to bail from clean pockets and create chaos for himself. But I project both of these guys as high quality starters, and I don't think you can go wrong if you're Chicago or Washington. Now, if you watch my first mock draft, I said it would take something insane for the top 3 picks to not be Drake May, Caleb Williams, and Marvin Harrison, but finishing up Jayden Daniels, I don't think I can keep him out of the top 3. That's going to be my pick for the Patriots. He's the best pocket passer in this class, and he also probably runs a 4.4. His processing ability, his efficiency getting through his reads, working over the middle of the field, I think NFL teams are really going to value. He was one of the most accurate quarterbacks in college football this year, almost never turns the ball over. He has the lowest career turnover-worthy play rate of any quarterback in this class. The main thing I worry about with Jayden Daniels is having a slender build and not really being able to power out of sacks. And then he's also a couple years older than Drake May and Caleb Williams, wasn't really a high-level NFL prospect until this season. So that's enough of a tiebreaker to put him as quarterback 3 for me, but I wouldn't let him fall out of the top 5. And then all that sets up perfectly for the Cardinals to get Marvin Harrison Jr., receiver out of Ohio State. I really like a lot of the other receivers at the top of this class, but for me, Marvin Harrison is still wide receiver 1. His size, technical polish, and ball skills, I think will make him immediately productive. No-brainer pick for the Cardinals here. The Chargers are picking at 5. I think you could make the argument for a right tackle here, but I'm going to go with Malik Neighbors, wide receiver out of LSU. He creates instant vertical separation. He's a fluid route runner at every level of the field, and he's so productive after the catch. If he was a little bit taller, he'd be in the Marvin Harrison Jr. tier for me, but I've got him just a step down. And the Chargers just invested the first round pick on Quentin Johnston, but you've got Keenan Allen getting up there in age, Mike Williams coming off the injury, and ultimately I just think Malik Neighbors is the best player available. New York should be trying to trade out of 6 to grab one of these top 3 quarterbacks, but as GM of every team, I'm not getting rid of that pick. So they're stuck picking at 6, and I am going to go with Joe Alt here. I don't love the idea of taking another great left tackle prospect and moving them over to the right side, but I think Joe Alt's capable of doing that. His tape this year was pretty close to flawless. Refined hand usage, he's got the movement skills to survive out on an island, and he really took his run blocking to another level this year. To me, he's pretty comfortably the best tackle in this class, and it beats reaching on a quarterback. And then at 7, the Titans are going to take my second-ranked tackle, Olu Fashanu out of Penn State. He has elite upside as a pass protector, balance, recovery skills, flexibility, length, and outside of JT Tuimoloau, he pretty much shut down every Big Ten edge rusher that he faced over his career. I do think his hand placement needs some work. He has a tendency to punch wide and late and give pass rushers access to his frame. In the Big Ten, that didn't result in many losses, but projecting to the NFL, that's something he needs to clean up. And then overall, he's just not a great run blocker at this point. He did show improvement in 2023, especially as far as playing with a mean streak, finishing blocks more consistently, but down to down, he just doesn't play with great leverage, falls off of blocks pretty consistently. Still though, one of the better pass protecting offensive tackle prospects that we've seen in recent years. With the 8th pick, I've got the Falcons taking Rome Odunze, wide receiver out of Washington. We sent the second round pick for Justin Fields. Now we're going to get him another weapon. Odunze is one of the better contested catch receivers that I've ever evaluated. He was 20 for 27 on contested targets this year, which is pretty much unheard of at that volume. This is something that's shown to not be that stable projecting from college to the NFL. Go back and watch Hakeem Butler's highlight tape and just see all the contested catches where he's just mossing dudes that he's 3 inches taller than, way more athletic. When you have this insane athleticism and physical physicality advantage over your competition and you win a lot with contested catches, when that difference in athleticism shrinks when they go to the NFL, a lot of times the contested catch efficiency goes away with it. But with Rome Odunze, his contested catch wins come a lot more from ball tracking ability and just elite focus at the catch point. He uses late hands to create a clean catching window even when he's covered tightly, and I think with Odunze, it's a skill that could translate to the NFL more cleanly than we see with other receivers. I still do have some concerns with Odunze. I think to me the most likely outcome for his career is a high-end wide receiver 2. He doesn't really have that second gear to separate vertically. A lot of his big plays and touchdowns were on contested catches along the sideline where the corner was able to stay attached to his hip. Watching him against press coverage, it's mixed results. There's some examples of really nice releases off the line of scrimmage, but you'll also see him get stuck to press coverage a lot more often than you would want for a first-round receiver prospect. And I think overall with Odunze, the issue is that he's more of a smooth athlete than he is an explosive athlete. When he runs more horizontal in-breaking routes, he's got good footwork. He's overall, I would say, a polished route runner, but the juice and explosiveness out of his breaks, I think, is lacking compared to the top 2 receivers in this class. At 9, I've got the Bears going with Brock Bowers, tight end out of Georgia. If you're a Bears fan, you might say, why would we do this? We already have Cole Kmet. Kmet and Bowers are playing really 2 different positions. Cole Kmet's more of your inline wide tight end. Brock Bowers played about 50% of his snaps at Georgia from the slot. He's basically a slot receiver that can also line up on the line of scrimmage and block. He's such a skilled and fluid route runner. He's separating easily against slot corners in the SEC. He can win one-on-one against man coverage in the underneath game. He can also separate vertically and run seams, and then he's extremely skilled and explosive after the catch. So outside of having this elite, like Jared Cook level catch radius, he really is the complete package for a receiving tight end. And then as a blocker, he's definitely someone that punches above his weight class. I thought his blocking tape in 2022 was a little bit more impressive, but you'll see him widen out defensive ends. On screen passes and toss plays, he can locate defensive backs and linebackers, plant them into the ground. I do think he has somewhat limited potential as an inline blocker in the NFL just because he is so undersized. But to me, there's really no conflict between Brock Bowers and Cole Kmet. That would make for one of the best 12 personnel lineups in the NFL, and he's someone that's going to play most of his snaps in the slot. At 10, I've got the Jets taking J.C. Latham. He's going to get single game scouted so hard this year where people only watch the Michigan game and really like 2 plays from the Michigan game and kind of make up their mind based off of that. He had a really bad rep on the last play of the game against Michigan. The rest of the game I thought was really solid, and his entire body of work this year I think makes him worth a top 15 pick. He's probably the strongest player in this class. I guess it would be between him and Tavondre Sweat out of Texas. He's 360 pounds. He drives people off the line of scrimmage as a run blocker. He's got a great anchor and pass protection, really consistent hand usage, firm grip strength. In Alabama's offense, his pocket range wasn't tested that often. I think he has the movement skills and slide quickness to play tackle on the outside, but that is one minor concern. And then probably my biggest issue with J.C. Latham is penalties. 21 penalties over the last 2 seasons, and there is kind of an element of just sloppy play with J.C. Latham, but overall the movement skills at his size and the natural talent I think is worth betting on in the top 10. At 11, I've got the Vikings taking my number 1 edge rusher, Jared Verse. He's probably the best power rusher in this class. Go watch his sacks against Florida and Louisville to end the season. Some of the most disrespectful speed to power reps that you'll ever see. He creates so much knockback on initial contact, violent hand pop, and he does a good job using a speed chop to beat the outside hand and win the edge. He doesn't have elite bend. I wish he had a better inside counter, and especially in run defense, he just misses way too many tackles in the backfield. So he's not a perfect prospect, but I think out of the top guys, he's the perfect balance of traits and an already developed skill set. The Denver Broncos are picking at 12, and for the Broncos, I'm looking to trade back and recoup some of that draft capital. And when I look at this offensive tackle class, there's 4 players that I have first round grades on. So if you really need an offensive tackle, in my opinion, this is the last chance to go and get one. So I'm going to have the Bengals trade up with the Broncos. The Bengals are going to send 18, 49, and a 4th round pick next year, and the Broncos are going to send 12 and a future 3rd round pick. And for all of these trades, I'm using the trade value chart, just trying to balance it out as close as possible. So the Bengals are going to take Amarius Mims out of Georgia. He's got all the the size, frame, movement skills, athletic traits that you would want for really a top 5 pick at the offensive tackle position, but he's the least experienced offensive tackle in this class, 803 career snaps and just 8 starts. He's the only offensive tackle in this class with under 1,000 snaps for his career. So it's a very difficult evaluation because the sample size for everything is so small, but what he's shown on such a limited sample size, I think is enough to make him a first-round pick. This is obviously with the assumption that they let Jonah Williams walk and then Amarius Mims slides right in there at right tackle, but he's really patient and skilled with his hands. He's got a good natural anchor. He gets into it quickly, and the run blocking I think needs some work from a technique standpoint. He's got a bad habit of leaning his head into down blocks and falling through, but he can get out in open space, flatten linebackers, create displacement off the line of scrimmage. It wouldn't shock me at all if he ended up being the best offensive tackle in this class. We just haven't really seen enough for me to rank him that high. At 13, I've got the Raiders taking Jerzon Newton, defensive tackle out of Illinois. I think this is going to be a pretty common pick across mock drafts this year. I see Johnny Newton as like Kalijah Kancey if he was 10% stronger and 10% less explosive and twitchy. It's basically Kalijah Kancey, but you add 10 or 15 pounds. He has a full set of pass rushing moves, really quick hands, explosive off the snap. He's in that tier of pass rushers that I would describe as technicians, just a seemingly infinite way of winning with his hands, and he does a great job transitioning into secondary moves when his first one gets locked up. I think he's a really good run defender, probably a step above Kalijah Kancey coming out. There are some times, just because he has 32-inch arms and he's kind of undersized, that he will get covered up by reach blocks, and I think in the NFL that could be a slight issue or at least an adjustment for him. But if you need immediate interior pressure, Johnny Newton is the guy to target in this class. At 14, the Saints are always a tough team to draft for. It's always hard to figure out exactly what the vision is, but despite all the investment they've made at edge rusher, I still see that as their biggest need, and I'm gonna go Dallas Turner, edge rusher out of Alabama. Out of the top 3 guys, he's the high ceiling, low floor pick, and given the Saints' recent history at that position, it wouldn't surprise me if they went with Laiatu Latu. But sticking with my board, I'm gonna go with Dallas Turner. Good length, elite speed, explosive first step. He wins with power. His most effective move is an inside counter. He just doesn't really have a go-to way of winning with his hands at this point. He'll use a swipe move occasionally, but overall just pretty inaccurate and disjointed with his hands. He's the type of player that might not be as productive as a rookie, but we look up 3 to 4 years into their career and he's the best edge rusher from this class. At 15, the Colts definitely have other needs. I still think cornerback is the best place to go here, and I'm gonna go with Nate Wiggins out of Clemson. The Colts got some surprisingly good play from some later round corners this year. Jalen Jones was one of my guys last year. He had a solid rookie season, and I've always been critical of Gus Bradley for being so committed to running cover 3, but last year was the one example where I kind of understand where he's coming from. They clearly felt like they had to hide or overcome the personnel in their secondary, and it's great if those late round UDFAs end up being real players for you, but ultimately you need a dude that can just lock up number 1 receivers, and to me that's Nate Wiggins. I think this cornerback class is crowded at the top, but Nate Wiggins is still my number 1 corner. The footwork and mirror skills from single coverage is what I think sets him apart. He's explosive driving on routes from off coverage. He's a good zone corner, solid route recognition. He's a player that it seems like is playing at slow motion at the catch point, just with his composure raking the ball out. He would be an easy top 10 grade for me if he just weighed 10 to 15 pounds more. For the Seahawks, I'm going kind of best player available here and taking Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State. He played right tackle for Oregon State. I have him listed as a guard. I think that's his best position in the NFL. He's a mauling run blocker, probably leads the top offensive lineman in this class in terms of pancakes or knockdowns as a run blocker. I have him moving inside, but my issue with him at tackle has more to do with technique than natural talent, and it's something that I think could be fixed, and tackle could end up being his long-term spot. Without getting too far into technique, he has this bad habit in pass pro of punching too early with the outside hand. Normally you want to either lead with an inside hand punch, or you want to flash the outside hand and then pull it back once the pass rusher gets into their move. He'll just throw his outside hand, and a lot of times in the Pac-12 that initial punch is enough to stop the pass rush, but if the outside hand gets swiped down, he doesn't really have the movement skills, pocket range to recover the edge. So when you see him get tested with true speed around the edge, he does kind of give a short corner. I think his hand usage outside of that is solid, and if he fixes that, I could see him having success at offensive tackle, but I do think he's probably best at guard in the NFL. Now, Fuaga would have been the dream pick for the Jags at 17 with how bad their interior run blocking was this year, but they're going to have to take another great player, which is Brian Thomas Jr., receiver out of LSU. He's 6'4" with blazing speed, long arms, massive frame. He's so fluid at the line of scrimmage. He's got a bunch of different ways of beating press coverage. A lot of times with these bigger receivers, it's easier for corners to land their punch when they're in press, but with Brian Thomas, he's got the lateral fluidity and quickness, but he also covers so much ground with each step. He can create horizontal separation instantly and then cut back in the opposite direction, and then really good ball skills. He can high point contested targets, but he's also got the ball tracking ability along the sideline or back corner of the end zone. So many touchdowns this year, it seemed like, off of slot fades in the red zone, and he's usually getting both feet in bounds. I've seen him run some nice in-breaking routes, but pretty clunky route runner overall. He's definitely more of a vertical stretch, big play type of receiver at this point. The Broncos have the 18th pick, and I'm sure this is going to be the most unpopular pick in this mock draft, but I am going to go with Bo Nix, quarterback out of Oregon. He's the last quarterback that I'm thinking about in the first round. From the Broncos' perspective, I completely understand if they just wanted to take it on the chin this year, start Jarrett Stidham, and then use this pick to invest in other parts of their roster. I wouldn't have any pushback against that strategy. But for me, I do have a true first-round grade on Bo Nix. He has good arm talent, he's accurate, he's comfortable throwing over the middle of the field, he's a quick processor within structure, he can get out on the move, he does a great job when he breaks the pocket of manipulating linebackers, identifying windows in those underneath zones. He had one of the lowest pressure to sack conversion rates of any quarterback in this class. He was PFF's highest graded quarterback under pressure by far. And if you look at just his raw stats, they are definitely inflated by screen passes. Oregon's offense this year was just unbearable to watch with how many screens they throw. But if you just take away all the screen passes and solely look at the downfield stuff, I think Bo Nix has first-round quarterback tape. It's the same thing with Jayden Daniels, where he's an older prospect who wasn't really an NFL prospect until this year, so that is a slight concern for me. And then his footwork is a major problem. He doesn't throw from a consistent platform at all. Even when he doesn't need to, he's drifting away from clean pockets for no reason. But in my opinion, Bo Nix with good footwork would be worth a top 10 to 12 pick. The Packers are picking at 19. There have been 3 receivers come off the board so far. I have 4 first-round receiver grades this year, and the Chiefs desperately need to upgrade their receiver room, so they're going to trade 26 and 58 to the Packers for 19 and 92, and I've got the Chiefs taking A.D. Mitchell, wide receiver out of Texas. My high-end comp for him is CeeDee Lamb. My low-end comp is Corey Davis. He's got size, speed, and fluidity at 6'4" that you just can't teach. He has so many ways of separating versus single coverage, kind of a similar thing with Rome Odunze, where he's more of a smooth athlete than he is explosive, but I can't pass up his route running ability in the first round. He has really good ball skills and spatial awareness. He can adjust his body, make really difficult catches along the sideline, and he only had 1 drop last year. I'm not exactly sure what I'm missing with him not being a consensus first round pick, but to me, he's clearly one of the 5 best receivers in this class. And then at 20, I've got Tampa Bay taking the last of my top 3 edge rushers, which is Laiatu Latu out of UCLA. He's pretty clearly the most polished pass rusher in this class. He's got a wide set of moves. He's just a blur winning with his hands, crossing the blocker's face. He was forced to medically retire, so there's pretty major injury concerns there. That's not really affecting my grade at this point. We'll learn more details about that later in the process. What has him as my 3rd ranked edge is number 1, arm length. He has 32-inch arms, and with as productive as he was last year, like he led college football in pass rush win rate, there still are times that you see that length disadvantage show up. He actually misses with his hands pretty often, but he's so quick and refined in everything else that he does that a lot of times it results in a win. But there's plenty of times that he goes in for that cross chop and just whiffs on the outside arm. And when you watch the few reps against high quality NFL caliber competition, he looked pedestrian, honestly. Against Talise Fuaga, Jordan Morgan, and then Jonah Monheim for USC, who actually just returned to school, he was lined up on them probably 20 times each game and didn't have a whole lot of success. He also doesn't really win with power, so even though he has a lot of moves, that does kind of limit the diversity of his plan of attack. And I think he has above average bend, especially for someone of his height, but he's not super bendy and flexible turning the corner. We got the Cardinals at 21. Now that we've given Kyler Murray another weapon. It's really just about adding as much talent as possible to this defense. And I'm going to go with cornerback Terrion Arnold out of Alabama. Kool-Aid McKinstry was the Alabama corner on everyone's radar heading into the season. I thought Terrion Arnold had objectively better tape, and he's played his way into being probably a first-round pick. He has special change of direction ability in man coverage. He can flip his hips, accelerate out of a speed turn, and play the ball. A great example of that is his interception against Kentucky. He had 12 pass breakups and 5 interceptions on the year. Really competitive at the catch point, disruptive in press, and he was also the best run defending corner in college football. He's one of a few players in this class that I think could play on the outside, but might actually be better in the slot because of the value he adds as a run defender. And as we start a run on corners, I've got most of these guys grouped together pretty closely, but Terrion Arnold's going to be my first player off the board. At 22, I've got the Rams going with Cooper DeJean, cornerback out of Iowa. I think he's a perfect scheme fit for what they're trying to do defensively. He can accelerate from off coverage. He's got the straight line speed to keep up with receivers down the field, good route recognition from match coverage, and then he's a force defending the run. He can stack and shed. He's got the play strength to hold his own, free himself from blocks. I think curls and comebacks gave him some issues later in the season especially, and he doesn't seem that comfortable turning around and playing the ball in the air if the receiver's got a step on him, but I think he's a good pick to infuse some talent into LA's secondary. The Steelers are picking at 23. I'm actually going to have the Lions trade up from 28. They're going to send 91 and 206. The Steelers are going to give 23 and 123. And Detroit's going to take another cornerback, Ennis Rakestraw out of Missouri. This guy's been kind of a late riser, still 79th on the consensus board. I don't think he makes it out of the first round. He's so composed and under control in press coverage. He's got the lateral fluidity and change of direction skills. He almost never gets beat vertically, and he's a high impact run defender as well. So the one position last offseason that I didn't think the Lions invested enough in, but they're going to add to their cornerback room with Ennis Rakestraw, who I think is one of the most underrated players in this class. At 24, the Dolphins really need an offensive tackle, and from this point on, pretty much every offensive tackle I take is going to be a slight reach, at least based off of my board, but that's just kind of how the position stacks up as far as supply and demand. I'm going to go Jordan Morgan, left tackle out of Arizona. He has a ton of experience. He's overall just an extremely balanced offensive tackle, really good zone run blocker, which makes him a good fit for the Dolphins scheme. I thought he struggled dealing with power. He would give pass rushers access to his frame and get walked back into the pocket pretty consistently. And a common theme with a lot of these late first to second round offensive tackles, he was extremely vulnerable to inside counters. I think his best position in the NFL is guard, but my philosophy with these types of players is that you let them fail at tackle first, and the Dolphins still need guard help anyways. At 25, it's time for the Eagles to finally invest in this secondary, and we're going to take Kool-Aid McKinstry, the other cornerback out of Alabama. He led college football in pass breakups in 2022 and was targeted a lot less frequently this year, so he didn't put up as many stats. I honestly thought his tape took a slight step backwards this year. He's a well-rounded athlete, but he doesn't have any elite traits. He gets stacked vertically a lot more often than you want to see, and the short area burst to close off space when he gets out of phase is kind of average, but he's so technically sound, patient, and balanced in everything that he does. I think with Kool-Aid McKinstry, it's more of just a high floor, low ceiling type of situation. So the Packers traded back to 26. I'm going to have them take Minnesota safety Tyler Nubin, who's my top safety in this class. Really good eyes and zone coverage, quick, instinctive route recognition. He doesn't have elite range. I think he's probably more of a box safety in the NFL, but he's an extremely reliable tackler. He's going to be a plus in run defense and just add some stability to that safety room. With the 27th pick, I've got the Texans taking Byron Murphy, defensive tackle out of Texas. He's a pass rushing 3 technique, explosive athlete, led defensive lineman last year in pass rush win rate, and he knows what he's doing with his hands. He's got a really effective club rip. He'll get into a club swim. He uses a push-pull pretty often, and then that first step gives him a really effective power rush, even though he is kind of undersized. As a run defender, he does pretty well against single blocks, although double teams will move him off his spot, and I just wish he was a better finisher as a pass rusher. There were so many missed opportunities on his tape this year. The bend and closing change of direction to convert those pressures into sacks was kind of lacking. You saw a perfect example of that that in the Washington game where Penix was able to sidestep the pressure, hit a dig route over the middle of the field. But for me, Byron Murphy is the second best defensive tackle in this class and definitely where you want to go if you need pass rushing juice from the interior. The Steelers traded back to 28 and they're going to take my top ranked center, Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon. Only one pressure allowed last season. Now as a center and especially in Oregon's scheme, he didn't have a ton of difficult one-on-one matchups, but still really solid in pass pro. He's got a sturdy build, wide base. Play strength is pretty much never a question with him. He's one of the best block finishers at the second level. You get him out on the move as a puller, he's looking to kill. He doesn't have elite movement skills. There are some difficult blocks where he can't really reach his landmark, but overall I think he's the top center in this class and will definitely stabilize the Steelers offensive line. The Bills I think really need help at receiver. I'm gonna have them take Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. He's one of the best route runners in this class. He's got the fluidity and change of direction, but also just precision with his footwork. He does a great job manipulating corners, setting up his breaks. He's got the speed to win over the top, and in a lot of ways he kind of profiles as a slot receiver, but with his speed and his ability to beat press coverage, I think he could survive on the outside. The biggest knock on Ladd McConkey is just size and frame. He doesn't have a great catch radius, but he gets open consistently. Dallas is picking at 30. I'm actually going to have them trade out of this pick. The Cardinals are going to send 104 and 35, and they're going to move up and take Alabama edge rusher Chris Braswell, recreating that Alabama defense. One of the closest one-to-one comparisons that I have in this class is Chris Braswell to Boye Mafe. They have a similar build. They win with power or they win with a cross chop. I'll be interested to see what he weighs in at. He doesn't have the biggest frame, which is kind of concerning for someone that you're projecting to win with power, but with his quickness, bend, and hand usage, he's someone that I'm targeting back into the first round or early second round at the latest. With the 31st pick, I've got San Francisco taking Duke offensive lineman Graham Barton. He plays left tackle for Duke. I have him as a guard. A lot of people actually have him as a center. I think he could play all three of the interior spots and maybe even kick out to tackle if you needed him. He plays with some of the best balance and control in this class. His hips are always pointed in the direction of the player he's blocking. Quick, tight hand usage. If he just had longer arms, I think he could play on the outside. And then he's explosive getting downfield as a run blocker. So the 49ers need a lot of help really at all 5 offensive line spots. And I think Graham Barton is the clear best offensive lineman available. And then at 32, I've got the Ravens taking Texas defensive tackle T'Vondre Sweat, 6'4", 346 pounds, just an immovable object in the middle of your defense. But he has some rare pass rushing juice for a nose tackle, really quick and polished hand usage. He's got a good set of moves to cross the blocker's face. I do question how productive he can actually be as a pass rusher because he doesn't have a very explosive first step. So there's a lot of times that he'll beat the blocker's hands, but he doesn't actually have the closing speed to turn the corner and get to the quarterback. But I think he'll be an immediate upgrade as a run defender, and he can actually give you something as a pass rusher, which you can't say for most nose tackles. All right, on to the second round. With the Panthers' first pick, I'm gonna go Keon Coleman, wide receiver out of Florida State. I've been on this train since I watched his tape. To me, he's not a first round prospect. The separation just isn't there. He was apparently playing through injury this season, which would definitely explain a lot of stuff, but to me the top 10, top 15 hype on him just isn't backed up by the tape. With that being said, he does have really good size. He's not even 21 years old yet. He's got some great highlight contested catches. He doesn't drop the ball. He's a pretty smart route runner against zone coverage. And for the Panthers here, unless there's just a crazy run, I feel like they just have to take the best receiver available. And then for the Patriots, we took Jaden Daniels at 3. Now it's time to get him a weapon, and I'm gonna go with Xavier Worthy, receiver out of Texas. He's extremely small, listed at 6 foot flat, 162 pounds, but he just has joystick change of direction skills. He's got the straight line speed to win vertically. Just the threat of his speed alone will put cornerbacks on their heels immediately and soften up the coverage. And he's someone that can separate at all 3 levels of the field. Drops were an issue, especially early in his career, but his hands got a lot better. He eliminated most of those focus drops, and he has really good ball tracking ability as a deep threat. But with his size because the catch space is just so constricted. A corner can just stick his hand out and pretty much completely cover his frame, and I don't see him being very successful as a contested catch target in the NFL. And then the Cowboys at 35 are going to take Patrick Paul, offensive tackle out of Houston. He's got a huge frame, over 36-inch arms, but excellent movement skills for a player of his size. He can slide up and down the arc effortlessly. He would be a first-round pick for me if his hand usage was a little bit more refined. He isn't someone that has no idea what he's doing with his hands, but his punch timing does need to improve, and he'll be a good developmental left tackle for the Cowboys. We got Washington picking at 36. Now, the whole trade away Montez Sweat and then spin that pick on another edge rusher, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but we're going to take Chop Robinson, edge rusher out of Penn State. He's been kind of a consensus first-round pick up to this point. He's got a lightning quick first step. Against some of the tackles he was facing, he could just straight up outrun them to their landmark, but his production has been highly concentrated in a few games against pretty weak competition if you look at the tackles he was going up against, and he doesn't ever win with his hands. Like, he doesn't really have any pass rushing moves. It's basically just speed around the edge. He'll kind of raise up the inside hand to wedge his way around the corner, but he's not winning with any moves, and it's ironic for a player with his name, but he's going to have to figure out some way of winning with his hands, and he's pretty much just a projection at this point, but the upside there is incredible. With the 37th pick, the Chargers are going to address right tackle and take Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. He's got incredible upside, well-built offensive tackle, great movement skills, the dominant flashes on his tape. You could see him sneaking into the late first round. There's just a ways to go from a technique standpoint. He doesn't sustain blocks with any sort of consistency, and he's probably not a player I would want to rely on to start as a rookie, but I think he's a really good high upside developmental offensive tackle prospect. We got the Titans at 38, but I'm going to have them trade down with the Eagles. Philadelphia is going to send 50 and 97 for the 38th pick, and they're going to take Cameron Kitchens, safety out of Miami, to continue to restock this secondary. If you just look at highlights, Cameron Kitchens is the best safety in this class. Some of the plays that he's able to make over the middle of the field, you see the high-end instincts and ball skills. There were still too many times this year where he was out of position, taking a bad tackling angle, but the natural talent and upside with Cam Kitchens, I think he has the potential to be a game-changing safety. At 38, we've got the Giants. I'm going to have them take wide receiver Xavier Legette out of South Carolina. I do worry about the late breakout with Legette. Fifth-year senior, wasn't even starting until his final year. At receiver, ideally you want players that had immediate success and didn't just start being productive when they were physically dominant over everyone. But he's up there with Keon Coleman for some of the best highlight catches of anyone in this class, and I actually think he's an underrated route runner. He's got some good separation ability at his size, but testing is going to be big for him. I think if he tests like an elite athlete, he's probably going in the top 40. And with the 40th pick, we got the Commanders. They took Caleb Williams, an edge rusher, and Chop Robinson. Now we're going to shore up the protection and take Kieran Amegaji, offensive tackle out of Yale. He's got over 36-inch arms. He's a really explosive athlete, and he was just dominant against his level of competition. Mauling run blocker. He eliminates second-level defenders. He'll drive a 3 technique 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, but he's a lot less of a project than I was expecting going into his tape. I thought his hand usage and punch timing was really solid overall, but it's just so hard to evaluate because the level of competition he was facing, they just posed no threat, especially rushing the passer. There was no one he faced that was even comparable to what he'll see in the NFL, and the fact that his tape wasn't flawless against that level of competition, that does have him as a second-round prospect for me. There was still like 1 or 2 reps where he got beat to the outside, and if you're playing in the Ivy League, you need to be pitching shutouts. And then sticking with developmental offensive tackle prospects, the Packers are at 41, and they're going to take Kingsley Suamataia, offensive tackle out of BYU. He was 3rd on Bruce Feldman's freaks list, 6'6", 325 pounds, moves around the field like a fullback. His tape to me was really up and down. I watched the Texas game and was not very impressed at all, but then you watch Oklahoma, West Virginia, those games had me thinking he could maybe sneak into the first round. The hand usage is still kind of all over the place to me, and just body control and balance I think needs a lot of work. I think what the Packers have seen from Rasheed Wallace, he's probably their day one starter in this scenario, and Kingsley's more of a developmental guy that could potentially develop into an elite left tackle. At 42, I've got the Vikings taking another front 4 defender, defensive tackle Michael Hall Jr. out of Ohio State. Insanely quick hands, explosive off the snap. This is the best guy available to get interior pressure. He is kind of undersized, 285 pounds. You see that show up in run defense, but it looks like he has good length, and I think as a pass rushing 3 technique, he's one of the more underrated players in this class. Chicago's up next at 43. I'm gonna have them trade down 10 spots. The Houston Texans are gonna jump up, sending 53 and 88 for 43 and 125, and Houston's gonna take cornerback Quinyon Mitchell out of Toledo. If you need a corner to play off coverage, read routes, explode out of a back pedal, make plays on the ball, Quinyon Mitchell is your guy. He had 27 pass breakups and 6 interceptions over the last 2 seasons. He's apparently going to run somewhere in the 4.3s to 4.4s, really good recovery speed on tape. My biggest issue with Quinyon Mitchell is that he played almost exclusively off coverage at Toledo. Outside of the red zone, like 5 yards off the goal line, he was almost never in press. I don't know how much of that is Toledo's scheme, but you would have liked to see more examples of him in press coverage. But in Houston's defense, where they're playing a lot of off quarters, I think he'll be a great fit. At 44, I've got the Raiders taking JJ McCarthy, quarterback out of Michigan. McCarthy and Amarius Mims are probably the 2 most difficult evaluations in this class. With McCarthy, again, the sample size is just so small. He's played all of these games this year, but within those games, there's really like 2 or 3 throws that he's being asked to make. The first 6 or 7 weeks of the season you can almost throw out because the level of competition is so poor, and he has a lot of traits that I think are projectable to the NFL. He's got a big arm, quick release, he can get outside of the pocket, he's accurate throwing on the run, but the sample size of actual throws that Michigan's offense was asking him to make is just so small, and within that small sample size, I think he was pretty far from perfect. You still see some bad decisions occasionally. He's consistently hitting receivers out of stride. So many throws that are technically catchable, but the receiver has to stop his momentum to slow down and make the catch. If he makes it to the second round, I think he's worth taking there, but he's someone that I want sitting as a rookie. So in this scenario, Aiden O'Connell would come in as the starter, and you're hoping that he can develop into a starter a year or 2 down the line. And then I think there's kind of a drop off approaching at corner. So I'm gonna have the Steelers trade up with the Saints, use some of those picks they got from the Detroit trade. The Steelers are gonna send 55 and 91, and the Saints are going to give 45 and 136. And Pittsburgh's going to take Kamari Lassiter, cornerback out of Georgia. He's the last outside corner that I have a 2nd round grade on in this class. I see him listed at 180 pounds. That's always wild to me watching his tape. He plays so much bigger than that, so I'll be interested to see what he actually weighs in at. But Lassiter and Joey Porter Jr. is a great cornerback duo for the future. At 46, the Colts are going to take Jermaine Burton, receiver out of Alabama. Didn't have a single drop last season, great ball skills and contested catch ability, but he's an advanced route runner, crisp in and out of his breaks, and I think he could succeed at multiple receiver positions. With the 47th pick, the Giants are going to take Michael Penix Jr., quarterback out of Washington. He was getting a ton of hype after that Texas game as being a 1st round quarterback prospect. If you watch the rest of his tape though, he's not a 1st round prospect, especially considering the injury concerns and the fact that he's I think 6th year senior. He seems to have a reputation as being an accurate quarterback. That has not been the case for the majority of the season. The first Oregon game and the Texas game were his 2 best performances of the season. The rest of his tape, the ball placement was very inconsistent. You hardly ever see him target the middle of the field, and he just gets locked onto his first read way too often. Positional value might push him up higher on some boards, and the Giants definitely need a quarterback, but 47's about as high as I'm willing to go with Michael Penix. With the 48th pick, the Jags are going to take Leonard Taylor III, defensive tackle out of Miami. He's an explosive 3 technique, former 5-star recruit with all the movement skills that you could ask for. He just hasn't put it all together as far as consistent tape. He was invisible in a lot of the Miami games I watched this year, and if you just took the 5 best plays from each player, you could see Leonard Taylor going a lot higher, but at this point, he's more of a potential developmental upside type of guy than a day 1 contributor. At 49, the Broncos need a high-end cornerback 2 to play opposite of Patrick Surtain. I'm going to take cornerback DJ James out of Auburn. Now, Auburn seems to have this thing where they're just recruiting the most undersized, specifically underweight defensive backs that you'll ever see. DJ James is listed at 169 pounds, but his movement skills and fluidity in man coverage, even at that size, I think makes him worth a top 50 pick. The Titans got the 50th pick from the Eagles, and they're going to take Troy Franklin, wide receiver receiver out of Oregon. He's one of the fastest receivers in this class. He's got a diverse release package, really smooth and controlled footwork to beat press coverage. He had a 30+ yard reception in 12 out of 13 games this year. So he has a lot of what you look for in a deep threat, but he's very thin. He struggles with physical man coverage. He gets rerouted pretty easily, and he flashed some really impressive ball tracking ability, but the hands and physicality at the catch point I thought were both inconsistent. He could get boxed out by physical corners, and there were also just a good amount of focus drops on his tape. So I'm definitely lower on Troy Franklin than a lot of people, but I think once you get into the 50s, this is good value for him. At 51, I've got the Packers taking LSU defensive tackle Mekhi Wingo. I think he's a really underrated player in this class, 99th on the consensus board. I'm actually higher on him than anyone I have in my database here, but quick, explosive, good with his hands. I really like his upside as a pass rushing 3 technique, and with one more addition, I think the Packers have a really exciting young defensive line rotation. At 52, the Bucks really need help on the interior offensive line, and I'm going to take Christian Haynes, guard out of UConn. He's going to fit right into Dave Canales' scheme as a high-level zone blocker. The run blocking that Tampa Bay got from their interior was just not good enough this year, and I think Christian Haynes is an immediate upgrade there. With pick 53, I've got the Bears adding to their pass rush and taking Jonah Ellis out of Utah. He's a quick, powerful pass rusher, good set of moves, devastating inside spin. His level of play did seem to match the competition he was facing, which is kind of a concern, but I think he's the best edge rusher available, and the Bears still need some pass rushing help. And then at 54, I've got the Rams taking the other Penn State edge rusher, Adisa Isaac. He doesn't have quite the traits of Chop Robinson, but I actually thought his tape this year was a lot more impressive. He's more of a well-rounded player. He doesn't have great bend at the top of the rush, but outside of that, I think he has high-level pass rushing tools. The Saints are picking at 55. Now, I've got them taking Emeka Egbuka, receiver out of Ohio State. The Ohio State players are extremely late announcing their draft declarations. Denzel Burke actually declared while I was in the middle of recording, and I had to redo a lot of stuff, but it wouldn't surprise me if he comes back to school. He was injured for a lot of the season, didn't have much production. I think overall, he's more of a high floor, low ceiling slot receiver. Good feel for spacing and zone coverage. He's got reliable hands. He's a nuanced route runner, but not very explosive or twitchy. I don't know. He's 27th on the consensus board. I think that's way too high for Emeka Egbuka, but at 55 gives the Saints another quality pass catching option opposite of Chris Olave. At 56, I've got the Dolphins taking cornerback TJ Tampa. They have Kader Kohu in the slot. They've got Jalen Ramsey and Xavier Howard, who are both on the wrong side of 30. Cam Smith, I've yet to see any evidence that he actually exists, so I'm operating under the assumption that the Dolphins still need a cornerback of the future. And TJ Tampa is an extremely well-rounded corner, great in zone coverage. Anything within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, whether it's a check down against zone, a screen pass, he's shutting that down. He has good speed. He's really confident and coordinated at the catch point. There is some stiffness though in man coverage. Shiftier route runners can get him turned around a little bit. And then at 57, the Eagles are going to take my top linebacker, which is Edrin Cooper out of Texas A&M. This is probably the weakest linebacker class that I've ever evaluated. I don't know if I've seen a single position group that's as bad as linebacker is this year. There's really 2 linebackers that I would consider taking in the top 2 rounds, and Edrin Cooper is an instinctive playmaker. I just wish he was a little bit better as a tackler. With the 58th pick, the Packers are going to take cornerback Kalen King out of Penn State. He was thought of as a first-round prospect heading into this year, definitely had a down season, which was highlighted by him just getting torched by Marvin Harrison Jr. I still like the short area movement skills and the quickness, but overall his tape this year was very disappointing. He went from 3 interceptions, 9 pass breakups in 2022 to just 1 pass breakup this year. Obviously that doesn't tell the full story with corners, but I don't really see him as someone that has the size to hang on the outside, and his tackling consistency is another concern for me. Tackling is a huge underrated skill set for corners. The Browns have their first pick at 59. I'm going to take Jalen Polk, wide receiver out of Washington. He had a really rough stretch to end the regular season, but outside of that, he's been Washington's second best receiver. He's kind of a weird player in terms of strengths and weaknesses. He's not that big, but he has really long arms. He's a hands catcher. He full extension, high points the ball, and he does a great job creating a bigger catching window for himself. If you're asking him to cut horizontally, he makes crisp lateral cuts, but on curls and comebacks, cutting things off on the vertical plane, he really struggles to sink his hips, and then just doesn't have elite size or speed and doesn't really play bigger than his listed weight. But overall, I think a really solid, reliable number 2 or number 3 option. At 60, I've got the Lions taking another Washington player, Braylon Trice, edge rusher. He's a powerful pocket pusher. I could see him being someone that gets a bunch of pressures, but not that many sacks. He's very stiff trying to corner as a speed rusher. I don't see that being a major element to his game in the NFL. And consensus has him as a late first round pick, somewhere in the late 20s. I see him much more late second, early third. Really good college player, but just limited athletic traits. At 61, the Bills need a safety, so I'm gonna go with Javon Bullard, safety out of Georgia. He's kind of undersized. I wish he was more consistent and under control as a tackler, but he's just a playmaker in coverage. The range and playmaking instincts on the back end, I think, are some of the best in this class. At 62, I've got the Cowboys taking Peyton Wilson, linebacker out of NC State. He had probably the best tape of any linebacker in this class. He's a high impact player in every single phase. He led Power 5 linebackers with 67 total stops. He can get after the quarterback. He's a smart cover linebacker, but he does have some major injury concerns, a long list of injuries over the course of his career. And I also think he's kind of stiff breaking down in open space as a tackler, but still he's easily one of the top 2 linebackers in this class for me. The 49ers are picking next. I'm gonna have the Chargers trade up, sending pick 69 and 142 for pick 63, and they're gonna take cornerback Josh Newton out of TCU. Corner was a major issue for the Chargers this year. Michael Davis regressed, unfortunately, and I think they've got to address that position in this draft. Josh Newton's one of 2 players in this class that I haven't actually watched. I'm not just gonna BS about a player that I haven't seen on tape, but I know a lot of people like him, and I'm gonna send him to LA at pick 63. Last pick of the second round, the Ravens are gonna take Brendan Rice, wide receiver out of USC. He's listed at 6'3". I don't think he's that big. He does have good size though. He's the son of Jerry Rice, which is about as good as it gets as far as bloodlines, and he didn't have great production, but I think the separation ability's there. His biggest issue, I think, is physicality at the catch point, but he could be a good replacement for Odell Beckham Jr., who I'm assuming they probably let walk. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to subscribe and leave a like, and also follow us on all of our social medias. The links to those are in the description. At 65, the Panthers are going to take Troy Fontenot, guard out of Washington. He plays left tackle for them, but I think definitely going to move inside in the NFL, and he's probably the player at this point that I'm lowest on relative to consensus. He just has so many losses to the inside and pass protection. He's good with his hands. He's got an effective snatch trap technique against power rushers, but I think the pocket range is lacking. Again, the inside counters, it's every single game with Troy Fontenot, and then overall, he's not a good run blocker. He has some highlight plays as a puller that I see always get posted on Twitter, but snap to snap, sustaining blocks, he's one of the worst run blockers in this class. He consistently gets out leveraged and falls off of reach blocks, down blocks. He doesn't keep his feet moving. He doesn't have great range as a run blocker, and I'm seeing this guy get talked about as a second or even first round pick. First round to me is wild. I even think second round is too rich, but taking him at the top of the third, I think he'll be a quality pass protecting guard. Moving him inside where there's less space to cover, I think he could have a lot more success there and should still be an upgrade to what they had inside this year. At 66, the Cardinals are going to take Cooper Beebe, guard out of Kansas State. He's an older player with really short arms, but he's got the strength and technique of a high-level guard prospect. The Commanders already took an edge rusher, but I'm going to double up at that position and take Gabriel Murphy out of UCLA. Laiatu Latu is going to get all the attention, but the Murphy twins, Gabriel and Grayson Murphy, I think are really good prospects in their own right. Gabriel Murphy, I think, is an easy third-round grade. Grayson Murphy's probably going to be more of a fourth to fifth round player, but Gabriel's really explosive, quick with his hands, doesn't have great bend around the corner, but I think should be one of their best pass rushers as a rookie. At 68, the Patriots are going to get more speed at the receiver position with Tez Walker out of UNC. He can separate vertically, he can win at the catch point, but he doesn't do a whole lot else besides that. He needs a few extra steps to throttle on comebacks, and he doesn't really produce anything after the catch, but purely as a deep threat, I think there's still a lot to like. I've got the 49ers taking Mason Smith, defensive lineman out of LSU. He's a young player who I think his best football is definitely ahead of him. You didn't really see it in terms of sustained production, but he showed the flashes of what he can do as a pass rusher at his size. And I could see him being someone like Gervon Dexter, who has all the physical tools, just hasn't put it all together yet. And then the Giants are going to take Brandon Dorlus, another defensive lineman out of Oregon. He's kind of the opposite, where he was a lot more productive, but maybe more limited as far as athletic traits. I see him as kind of a tweener between edge rusher and 3 technique. He's a little bit too small, I think, to play defensive tackle, but he's not really explosive enough to play on the edge. He's more of just an overall good enough player that he shouldn't fall too far past 70, but I do have some concerns about his positional fit in the NFL. And then continuing the run on defensive linemen, the Cardinals are going to take Rook Ororo out of Clemson, another undersized defensive tackle, oversized defensive end. I don't think he has this incredible upside, but when he did get the opportunity to actually tee off as a pass rusher, you saw he's really quick with his hands. He's got an effective club move, a good swipe move that I saw him use a few times. So I'm excited to see him in the Senior Bowl one-on-ones, because his responsibility at Clemson usually wasn't rushing the passer first and foremost. At 72, I've got the Jets taking wide receiver Ricky Pearsall out of Florida. He had probably the catch of the year against Charlotte, I believe, just one-handed snag over the middle of the field. And he's a very precise, crisp route runner. Any kind of timing-based route is just automatic. He's fluid in and out of his breaks, cuts everything off so quickly. 3.6% drop rate over his entire career. And outside of elite size and speed, I think he has pretty much everything you look for in a slot receiver. At 73, the Lions are going to take guard Dominic Pooney out of Kansas. He plays left tackle for them. It's a scheme that's really difficult to evaluate as far as pass protection. They run basically the triple option, so very few true pass sets on his tape. So I'd be interested to see if he can stick on the outside. If not, I think he'll be a high quality guard. We got the Falcons at 74. They're actually going to trade back with the Seahawks. Seattle's going to give 78 and 154 for 74 and 205. And they're going to take quarterback Spencer Rattler out of South Carolina. At one point, he was viewed as an eventual top 5 pick. That obviously didn't pan out, but I thought he had some really good tape this year. Still not someone that's in the first or second round conversation for me. He breaks from the pocket a lot, makes a lot of his best plays out of structure, but I think he has the talent and enough refinement to take in the 3rd round. And then at 75, the Bears need a center, so they're going to take Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia. Powerful, mauling run blocker. He's got a massive frame. When he's accurate with his punch, he can end the rep immediately, and he's one of the more violent block finishers in this class. My big hang up with Cedric Van Pran is just slide quickness and lateral mobility. If he oversets or gets out of position, he's just too stiff in open space to recover. And then the Broncos, assuming they move on from Lloyd Cushenberry, they're going to take Zach Frazier, center out of West Virginia. He's the second player in this mock that I haven't watched, but his season was cut short due to injury. I know there's a lot of people that really like his tape, but it seems like he's probably going to fall because of that. I've got the Raiders taking cornerback Chris Abrams-Drain out of Missouri. One of the best cornerbacks in this class at the catch point. I think he is kind of limited athletically. Just in terms of technique and skills, he's probably a top 50 pick caliber of player, but he's undersized and doesn't have elite recovery speed. And then the Falcons need help on the edge. I'm going to have them take JT Tuimoloau out of Ohio State. At the time of this recording, he has not made a decision. It would not surprise me if he decides to come back to school. He's 29th on the consensus board, but I think that's way too high based on what he's put on tape. He's pretty much unable to win the corner as a speed rusher. Most times he tries to rush the outside shoulder, he's ending up on the ground, and his most common move is the long arm or bull rush, and that's not really that effective for him. He's a really smart player. He makes plays in coverage. He'll make some plays in run defense, but for someone that's 270 pounds and is going to be just this solid, like, early down base defensive end, he gets moved back by tight ends pretty frequently. So 3rd round, I'm okay with Tuimoloau, but anything top 50 I think is way too high. The Jags need an upgrade at slot corner, so I'm going to go Kalen Carson out of Wake Forest. He had some bad reps against Keon Coleman, but overall he's a really aggressive press corner, good movement skills. I think he'll definitely be an upgrade to Trey Herndon. At pick 80, the Bengals really need an upgrade on the defensive line. I'm going to go Chris Jenkins out of Michigan. He's supposedly an elite athlete. I think he was pretty high on Bruce Feldman's freaks list, but you watch his tape, that just does not show up very often. He was a rotational player for Michigan's defense, and when he was on the field, there's a lot of plays that he's just not making much of an impact. Assuming he tests well, I'm probably just going to give him my standard late third round grade for an athletic project defensive tackle. With the 81st pick, the Seahawks are going to take a very underrated player, Keaton Oladapo, safety out of Oregon State. His game against Stanford is one of the best individual performances from this class. I think he had 2 interceptions and then forced another one. Against Washington, he had this crazy chase down forced fumble. He's big, fast, makes a ton of plays. I think he's a perfect box safety for Seattle. I've got the Colts taking Braden Fisk, defensive tackle out of Florida State. He's one of the older prospects in this class. Doesn't look like he has great length, but he's so quick with his hands. Out of all of these defensive tackles, he looks like one of the most difficult ones to block. At 83, the Packers are going to take the first running back off the board, which is Jonathan Brooks out of Texas. If he didn't get injured, he would be the clear running back 1 in this class. His patience and vision is unmatched, but the Packers are going to get great value here at 83. They're just going to have to wait a little bit longer to see him on the field. With the 84th pick, I've got the Bucs taking James Williams, who's a safety out of Miami, but I think he could play linebacker in the NFL. He's a former top 10 recruit, 6'4", 215 pounds. He's not even 21 years old yet. He's extremely fast, great closing speed, one of the most aggressive and physical defenders in all of college football last year. That resulted in a lot of highlight tackles, run stops, big hits, but it also resulted in some unnecessary roughness penalties and other flags of that nature. Overall, he's a very rough around the edges type of prospect, but I like his fit for Tampa Bay because they need a box safety, but they also might have a need at linebacker. We saw some nice things from their younger players, but I think James Williams is in the Jaron Kearse mold of like tight end eraser, box safety, gives your defense a little bit of everything type of player. And then at 85, the Cardinals are going to take Junior Colson, linebacker out of Michigan. If he was a little bit faster, he'd probably be a second round pick, but he's just an incredibly smart and instinctive linebacker. He actually has a much more difficult coverage role than a lot of college linebackers coming out, and I could see him being something similar to Nick Bolton from a few years ago. Now, there aren't any other offensive tackles that I have third round grades on, but in my opinion, the need for the Rams at that position is so extreme that I am comfortable reaching on Blake Fisher out of Notre Dame. I think he could be a good offensive tackle in a few years. At this point, the hand placement is just too out of control. Watching his tape, every time I started to feel like he could be more of a second round guy, he'd just have a disastrous loss that would kind of remind me why I have such a low grade on him. But they need some sort of developmental option and plan for the future at that position. At 87, I'm going to have the Steelers take Jeremiah Trotter Jr., linebacker out of Clemson. Another player that I think is probably a reach at this point based on my board, but the linebacker class is just so weak this year. They're going to have to reach. I think Jeremiah Trotter reads the game well, but he's undersized and lacking in speed, which is a bad combination for linebackers. At pick 88, I've got the Bears taking Rod Moore, safety out of Michigan. Assuming they move on from Eddie Jackson, he should be able to step in and replace him right away. He's got the range to play single high. He can play some man coverage, and he'll fit right into Eddie Jackson's spot because my biggest issue with Rod Moore is tackling consistency. The Chiefs are picking at 89. They need an upgrade to their second defensive tackle spot regardless of what happens with Chris Jones. So I'm going to go Tyler Davis out of Clemson. He doesn't give you much as a pass rusher, but he was one of the best run defenders in college football, probably the best run defending defensive tackle that I've watched outside of Tavondre Sweat. He's listed at 302 pounds. He looks a lot bigger than that, definitely plays bigger than that. So it'll be interesting to see what he weighs in at, but I think he's a solid run defending defensive tackle. I've got the Browns taking Georgia safety slot corner Tyke Smith. West Virginia transfer. A lot of similarities, in my opinion, between him and Javon Bullard, where if he could just limit the 10% extreme, like out of control plays on his tape, I'd feel a lot better about him as a prospect. I really like the high-end flashes of what he can do in man coverage, defending the run, defending screen passes. There are just too many examples where he's out of control as a tackler, and he seems to have good speed when it comes to keeping up with receivers down the field, but if it's beating a ball carrier to the edge, he loses the edge pretty consistently, so that's kind of weird. But still, I think he should be a 3rd to 4th round player. The Saints are up at 91. Now, defensive tackle is another one of these positions that I think is kind of thin this year, and at the back end of the 3rd round, I'm going to have to start reaching into my 4th round grades. So I'm going to go McKinley Jackson, defensive tackle out of Texas A&M. He's 6'2", 320, good frame, and there will be like 1 or 2 plays per game where he really unleashes it as a pass rusher, and you start to see the potential where he could be maybe a top 50 pick. It just doesn't happen with any sort of consistency. He's another player kind of in the Gervon Dexter mold. At 92, I've got the Chiefs taking Maryland safety Bo Braid. It might be Bo Broad. He popped off the screen in the Ohio State game, so I went back and watched some more of his tape, and to me, he's one of the best safeties in this class. Another safety that I wish was a more consistent tackler, which seems to be the common theme with this class, but he's also one of the most aggressive safeties, fitting the run, crashing downhill, so it makes sense that he's going to have some bad missed tackles on tape. I've got the Cowboys taking Kyrie Jackson, cornerback out of Oregon, 6'3", 195. I would bet is probably going to have the longest arms out of any of these corners. He can just shut receivers down at the line of scrimmage, and then when it gets to the catch point, he's got the length to completely overwhelm them. But if he misses with his hands in press, he doesn't really have the short area quickness to recover that effectively. At 94, the 49ers are going to take wide receiver Malachi Corley out of Western Kentucky. If you watch his tape, it's probably the highest percentage of targets that are screen passes of any receiver that you'll see, and he's going to get lazily comped to Deebo Samuel, but I figure may as well put him in an offense that at least knows how to use a player like Deebo Samuel. I still wish there were more or any really examples of him running real NFL routes or facing press coverage. You just hardly ever see that on his tape, so it kind of makes it a tough evaluation. The Ravens are picking at 95. They need a 3-down running back, and so I'm going to go with Audric Estime, running back out of Notre Dame. There are some other running backs I like more. I have a higher grade on Bucky Irving out of Oregon, but he's kind of superfluous with what they have in Keaton Mitchell. And Audric Estime, 6 foot, 228 pounds, powerful runner, really good one-cut, straight-line speed. He isn't really a shifty, dance-around in the backfield type of player, but he's someone that can carry the workload and be productive on early downs. And then the Jags are finally going to address the interior offensive line and take Christian Mahogany, guard out of Boston College. And I actually lied earlier. There are 3 players that I haven't watched. Christian Mahogany is one of those, but yeah, they need someone on the interior that can get some actual push. At pick 97, the Titans have addressed offensive tackle. They've addressed the receiver position. Now it's time to get an outside corner, so I'm going with Nehemiah Pritchett out of Auburn. Another one of these really skinny defensive backs, 6 foot, 183 pounds, but similar to what we were saying with DJ James, the movement skills and start-stop fluidity, even for someone that doesn't weigh that much, is still, I think, worth taking early. He had some of the best reps against Malik Neighbors of any corner that faced him, and you take Jalen Simpson, maybe 5th round, you got the Auburn secondary recreated in Nashville. At 98, I've got the 49ers taking Justin Aboigbe, edge rusher out of Alabama. He's kind of gone under the radar this year, but he's someone that pops when you watch the Alabama defense tape. He's more of like a base defensive end. He's one of the best run defenders in this class, but he does have some pass rushing juice when he actually gets the opportunity. For the Bills, picking at 99, cornerback has become a lot less of a need with Christian Benford just becoming a dude, but I'm still going to fortify that position and take Jabbar Muhammad out of Washington. He reminds me a lot of Clark Phillips last year as an undersized player that punches above his weight class. I've kind of gone back and forth with Jabbar Muhammad, but I honestly think his last 3 games have been his 3 best games of the season in the Pac-12 championship and then the 2 college football playoff performances, and I'd be okay taking him in the back half of the 3rd round. And then final pick of the 3rd round, I'm just going best player available for Washington and taking Johnny Wilson, tight end out of Florida State. He plays receiver, but I think he's definitely a tight end at the next level. He's 6'7", 239 pounds. He has really impressive fluidity for a receiver, but I still don't think he's quick enough to beat press coverage in the NFL. He'd be a lot higher on my board if he didn't have just terrible drop issues. So many focus drops on his tape, but his ball skills outside of that, like his ability to win in contested catches, is pretty good. And I think the high-end comp for Johnny Wilson is a Darren Waller, Mike Gesicki type of player. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. If you want to see my entire draft board as a filterable interactive table, I've got that up at atozsports.com. The link to that is in the description. And let me know in the comments any other NFL draft prospects that you'd like me to cover.